Before the panel, we conferred, and some of the panelists expressly disallowed certain topics, which I will mention otherwise. So we're not going to talk about building data teams. We're not going to talk about data lakes, except I just want to ask one thing. So a year ago, I asked Pete. Pete is kind of popularized the notion of data scientists. So I asked him, is it okay for a legitimate data scientist to say data lake? And Pete said, literally, I quote, probably not. That was 1 year ago. I just want to ask before we put this question to rest, is it still not okay to say it, or is it kind of becoming inevitable like Donald Trump, the data lake we're going to be stuck with?
I think, I'm trying to keep it safe for work here. Yeah, it's kind of the equivalent of like, go jump in a lake.
Okay.
If you say that, yeah, go get a data lake and come back to me.
Only ours, reservoirs and rivers. Lakes was
reservoirs, data reservoirs. Okay, data ocean? Is it okay? No? Okay.
Well, there was the lame thing about narwhals being unicorns from the data ocean that I was trying to popularize unsuccessfully, so.
That's may change things. This is beautiful. Probably no data lakes. So we have 4 great panelists. I'll let them introduce themselves, starting with Richard.
Hello, everybody. I'm Richard. I graduated 2 years ago from Stanford, the PhD in deep learning for natural language processing and computer vision. Then started a little startup called MetaMind, and we just recently got acquired by Salesforce. And now I'm the chief scientist at Salesforce.
Hi, I'm Siobhan Zillis. I'm a partner and founding member of Bloomberg Beta, which is an early stage venture capital firm. And so our firm exists to invest in companies that are transforming the future of work. And so within that, the lens that I focus on is anything data and machine learning oriented. And so just to give you a little bit of a flavor of the types of things that we're really excited about and invest in, within this data machine learning world, there are 3 categories. So the first, and this was the one we started investing in, was tools for data scientists and machine learning practitioners. So we've got about 4 investments in that space covering different areas of that. The second, and this is the one we're most active in, is machine intelligence for the knowledge worker. So basically cutting across every enterprise function. The majority of these tools end up using text data as an input, but we've also made investments in companies that are primarily using audio and visual data as well. And then the last, and this is the one we think is emerging and we're hoping to see more activity in, is machine intelligence for various different vertical industries. And so far we've made 2 investments in agriculture, 1 in healthcare and 1 in education. And we're really hoping to see, healthcare is heating up very significantly. We're hoping to see more things in cities. I'm personally obsessed with elderly care and what machine intelligence can do to help the plight of our aging populations. And then very finally, just more on a founder level, we're a seed stage investor. We love helping founders with early go-to-market fit, and so we tend to focus on companies that are problem first. And so, just an example of that is we're an investor in a company called Thule Technologies, which is in the agricultural space. It's basically data to help farmers make better irrigation decisions. So they started out with just the problem of, how do I help farmers maximize crop yields while minimizing water? Because as we know, in California especially, water is an increasingly large issue. So problem first is sort of our MO.
Hi, I'm Pete Skamrock, and thanks for the introduction, pre-introduction. But yes, I was a data scientist at LinkedIn. I was an early member of the data team, and my particular focus was around building data products. So I'm kind of at that intersection between machine intelligence and actually applying it to products that people use in the real world. While I was at LinkedIn, I think it grew from 30 million to over 300 million users. All of those members on LinkedIn were doing things like updating their profile, creating their public persona, and building their networks so that you could see who they're connected to and find job opportunities, business deals, things like that. Particularly things like LinkedIn skills and endorsements. If you love those, you can blame me. If you hate them, you can blame me after. But more in particular, I think a lot about using data and algorithms to help make work more efficient and to help people be more effective in what they do. And I think it's not just doing more of the same things faster, but actually by making the connections that you can make with AI, you can actually enable new things that you couldn't do before. And maybe that's something we can talk about later today. So now I'm working on putting that into practice with my own startup. So I have a new stealth startup, unfortunately, still stealth, but
What's your domain?
I actually, so little joke on my part, I put down stealth.ai on my Data by the Bay profile, and I got the domain and put it up just for you, so we have something to point to. But no, seriously, I'll be talking more about this in the near future. But I will say that I'm thinking about how can we make knowledge workers more effective.
Congratulations. What is still our panel, as always. Alexei tries to bring me onto his panels and surround me with super genius, so it's always fun. I'm Shri. I'm founder of the H2O AI community, and we've been building a grassroots community of AI and math movement, in many ways bigger algorithmics as a core thesis. Data products is what we're building. Some of the pieces we're doing now is more how to make data scientists more efficient was the first core theme behind the company. In fact, how do we make data scientists happy? I think from there we've kind of now trying to the next goal, which is kind of what Pete was mentioning, and the data scientists at LinkedIn try to build data products, right? So we're now enabling data products in most of our customers. About 5,000 companies use H2O today on a weekly basis, 1,200 of them on a daily basis, and we are now seeing verticals adopting AI in a rapid fashion. So vertical is the new horizontal. That's kind of core theme, and data is the only vertical that you need to focus on. So I think that's kind of being a very common thread amongst most of our customers. So we're building a lot of tools for AI. Our ultimate vision really is what is to make us more human using AI. And towards that, we're building a lot of more visual intelligence. How do you coexist with a very superior intelligence like AI? How do you not treat them like a bot? Bot actually is actually a derogatory word in my view of the world. You're probably looking at AI as being a substantial partner in the growth ahead and in the discovery that's really right ahead of us. So it's one of those wonderful times to be in. So thank you for having us.
Thank you, guys. So the title of this panel was, who is winning, and it was a little bit facetious, but actually I think I need to provide some background. In between the call for papers for this conference and the actual conference, 2 of our presenting startups were acquired, both by Salesforce, right? Prediction.io, Simon Chen talked about Spark and machine learning as a service, and Richard's MetaMind was acquired, and Richard became chief scientist of Salesforce. So I think we can frame this question in a way we see an arms race, right? Companies acquiring, AI startups with expertise, and apparently they want to win in a larger battle. So can you talk about what is it they're kind of fighting about? Where the winning will be, and why is such an urgency for established companies to acquire deep expertise in certain AI fields?
I don't want to start all contrarian, but I think I'm not a big fan of the title. I think, if anything, the answer is humanity is winning, because we don't have to do a bunch of boring work in the future. And just like 200 years ago, 90% of all people alive were working in the fields. That seems kind of silly now because we have tractors and other bigger machines. And that will be, there may be a short period where it's a tricky transition, just like the Industrial Revolution. But in the end, it will free up our time to do interesting work. So I think overall, if there was an answer, the answer would be humanity in my eyes. Now, if there is some competition, it's probably mostly over the AI talent. It's not so much about the models, because fortunately, and I really have to credit a lot of the senior members of the AI community for this, like Jeff Hinton and Jan LeCun and Andrew Ng and Joshua Bengio, who've been working in this field for a long time. And of course, those are just the well-known deep learning researchers. There are a lot of other famous machine learning researchers. And there's a huge community that really cares about pushing the state of the art in the open, in the public domain, and sharing their knowledge, and setting up conferences in ways that encourages knowledge sharing. And fortunately, once all these famous people got hired into these top companies, they continued with that and continued to publish, and hence are pushing the state of the art together. Even though the companies might compete on the business side. And so In that sense, I think the only sort of war that is going on is the war for talent. And that is also in some ways the answer of why there are acquisitions. Of course, for small startups, you can have a lot more impact if you can apply your tools and yourself to companies that already have a huge amount of resources, have a huge amount of data, which is data, compute, and algorithms are sort of the holy trifecta of getting things done in AI. And so it's a perfect mix.
Yeah, I'd chime in on that last point. So I'd agree with the first point about humanity winning. Ultimately, technology moves on and we adapt and improve. But when it comes to companies, so to that point, larger companies obviously have an advantage. And I think it's largely because they have the information. So I'd say information and not data. I think people get hung up on data. So there are a lot of large Fortune 500 companies that may have a lot of data, but it may not be the right kind of data. It may not be actionable information in the same way that Google has a lot of data, right? Or that Amazon has a lot of data. And so I think the big players, we probably know who all the big players are. They're the people who are competing for that talent and who are acquiring startups or getting people out of academia. And out of those large companies, I'd call most of them information-focused companies. Some of them have a little bit more of a hardware or design focus. Tesla maybe is an example that bridges both, where there's signs that they are doing AI and thinking about it in a way where they're pushing live updates. Their cars are online as opposed to being offline. But if you look at something like Apple, I think, I was joking before the panel that this would be a funny topic, but I do think there's a real battle happening across all these companies. We just saw Google launched their equivalent of the Amazon Echo. And I think it would be interesting to ask, who do you think is actually going to win? Like Google would be the traditional answer. But, but then think about Siri. Siri is the one that's been around for a while. But I would argue Apple is doing a lot of things that are limiting the data and the information they have to operate with. And they're doing it for what they think are good reasons, but I think in the end it may harm their users in terms of the quality of the product.
So one quick anecdote here that I keep hearing over and over and over again is usually when we talk to founders, they have in their heads some sort of strike price for, oh, well, if they paid me X million, I would be willing to sell the company, but nothing below that. But the interesting thing in the machine learning world is we've seen a lot of the founders say, well, I would actually only be open to being acquired by X or Y because of the specific data set they have. So it's interesting to think about the fact that they're not leading with a numerical amount for what they would sell for, but they're like, oh, actually, if I were able to power my platform with this data type and have access to these other customers, this is actually sort of a strategic thing in my mind as well, which is interesting. And two other quick points. So one is on, when we make investments at seed stage, a lot of these companies are machine learning first. And by that I mean they're choosing a problem type that's only solvable by virtue of some of the innovations technologically that have happened in the last couple of years. And then we're seeing companies, and the best example of this is something like Uber, which is machine intelligence second, right? So they put together this marketplace, and I mean, Uber has a lot of things they have going for them, but arguably one of the reasons they've become so dominant is because they were able to put the right data science and machine learning team in place, and that's how they really amplified the value of the product. And then the one point, and I'm curious to hear, everyone on this panel has worked with enterprises, so I'd really love to get your take, is we've seen a lot of these big companies be entirely binary about whether or not they have machine intelligence expertise. So you see these platform companies like a Salesforce or a Facebook or a Google, pretty much they've got it. From the very get-go, they've had machine learning as a part of what they've been doing. They understand the product iteration cycle. They understand what talent types they need and how to motivate that talent with the right data and incentives. And then the rest of the world is near zero. And so the struggle there has been, how do you educate people enough to use self-service platforms to get themselves to catch up? And so that's kind of just one thing I hope we can tease out over the course of the panel.
So I think, I guess it's an interesting question. I'm a founder who's kind of a fighter, but we've been, right? It's a long game. None of this was a short game. AI was not. When we were fundraising, we got kicked around across all these investors. Nobody was interested in ML. They wanted faster SQL, right? When you go ask the customers to say, highway slow, faster horses, faster SQL, not a car, right? So we defied the odds, and we still built an AI platform and data science platform and R. We used our community to really get, they embraced us first, then Python community, all the open source folks. So most revolutions start by being totally derogated, right? So everybody ignores you to death, right? So that's when you actually build something interesting. And Google themselves, I mean, one of my investors, angel investors, he had an opportunity to acquire Google for a couple of $1 million because the founders were tired of building a machine learning company themselves, right? So you kind of tend to think about these acquisitions as winners, but they're not really. I mean, if Google had sold and that particular investor, angel of mine, seed investor, ended up selling to Amazon, we would not have Google today. So I think really, if you think the long-term scheme of things, you need to build a platform to build more platforms and build the networks, the ecosystem around, raise a forest, not a tree. And that's what Google really did, is it built a full forest full of ideas. And you need to fund that ideas with a lot of energy continuously and continue to dream again and again and again within the same company. A startup is not one idea, right? It's a million ideas that you go back to back and continue to invest in them, invest in your people. It's the people who are building the company, not the products. The products keep changing. And AI today and tomorrow will be like basically whether it's stealth.ai or you call it health.ai or insurance.ai, you kind of go change one vertical at a time. And it's not true. Some of the big companies actually are. Some of our best customers are not in the Bay Area. They're in Midwest somewhere, in Cleveland or Dallas. So it's not actually true that big companies are sleeping. They're actually changing dramatically faster. If you see how Microsoft changed overnight into a Microsoft with MAI, I think change is possible, except you don't need to change all of the United States. You need to change the Silicon Valley of your company. And you need to find that and tap that nerve so you can bring change across a big vertical company. And that's happening. We're seeing a lot of that happen. And being partners in that change is what makes this whole thing exciting. The other big difference you'll see between AI and non-AI companies is the winners in AI. So historically, you would say there's a new trend coming. You need to be the second best, second from the last. So the bear gets the last guy and you're still running fast, right? In the AI race, the first person who crosses the line turns around and becomes the bear. So if you don't become the one who adapts, your disruptor, the entire vertical will become lost. So I think that's kind of what is really driving change in a lot of these big companies these days.
Thank you. I think we really got a broad spectrum of views on where this field is going. I want to kind of dig in a little bit and kind of take apart the pieces, right? I think we're doing a pretty complicated system. So today, multiple components of machine learning AI-powered companies are presented. And I think they're some of the most complicated startups around, right? Because, for instance, deep learning is the current most interesting, hot set of algorithms, but you need to go to school to properly do it, right? You know, even things like support vector machines are much simpler to take apart, right? But for deep learning, you really need to have proper expertise, which will take at least a couple years probably to build up properly. And we at Nitro we looked at various stages, and we kind of funded an internship with Stanford and LP Group to derive the basics from math first principles, and did the paper review, which basically entailed several months just to understand. And the whole, the knowledge is embodied in the community. You will not just understand by reading all the papers. You need to speak to some of the people. So we have this techno-social system where certain cutting-edge knowledge is embedded. You can glean some of this. You need to go to conferences. You need to interact with people to understand the algorithms themselves. But then you need a scalable system. You need a distributed system, which is another theme of this conference, which we call data pipelines. And we basically had about half of the talks which also requires properly, career, right? And data engineering is essentially an art in itself. So you need at least two pieces. Now we have VC because the effort needs to be funded. Best of these people need to be assembled together. So I would like to ask you, which parts of this do you think are most important, and how in your experience they interact? How, if you run a company, how are putting them together? And basically, if you want to achieve world domination, how should you put the whole thing together?
I think you left out another key piece, which is the problem to solve, right? So I think you, and Siobhan could probably chime in after this with more details on that, what it looks like from an investor point of view. But from my view of the landscape, I think it's really hard to marry what you just described. So that's a deep bench kind of startup, right? So you need people with the AI talent who otherwise would be going to a Google or a Facebook, or they would be doing well in academia. Plus, you need to build the infrastructure in a sane way. Nothing wrong with academic code, but it needs, for enterprise or something, it needs to be robust and scalable and all those kinds of things. But then you also need to be solving a real problem that they care about. That's often one of the hardest ones for technology startups, is you build some technology that could be great, but people don't want it. You're building the wrong car. You're building a Jeep instead of the car they want, or they don't even want a car. They want a horse, a flying machine. I think that getting those things together, that's the art of building a new product. And I think if you're a big company, you can absorb a lot more hits, right? So really, it feels like a startup, you only have so many bullets, and you have so much runway. For this particular type of company, I think, one thing I've seen is either you need to have a bigger war chest so that you can build the back end and the front end and research with the customer at the front end, or maybe you should be at a bigger company where you can take more swings.
So I think kind of there are two categories that we look at and invest in, and one category is the pioneers and one is the integrators, right? So I'll just give you two contrasting examples so you know what I'm talking about. On the pioneer side, these are folks that, world experts like, Richard, who have focused on, pioneering these new techniques, and then they're going to apply them to a problem. So we made an investment in a company called Deep Genomics, which is out of the same lab as Jeff Hinton, a fellow named Brendan Frey, who'd been working on these algorithms for 15 years, and then 10 years ago, he had a personal medical issue. Him and his wife, had a child yet to be born that couldn't be diagnosed, and they're like, I'm working on these algorithms that in theory should be able to solve this problem. So he spent a decade just focusing on healthcare, saying, if we were going to solve a problem here, or if we were going to adopt algorithms to these types of data sets, how would we do that? And so, he recently got to the point where he's like, okay, we think this is going to be a big deal. We want to throw more significant resources behind it because we think we can change the world of molecular diagnostics by kind of closing that genotype-phenotype gap with deep learning, because it's impossible to do it otherwise, or without a neural network-based approach. And so, that's a category that's certainly investable. I think the one thing that everyone has to keep in mind when you look at companies like that is it just takes longer to commercialize, right? Because you have a technology, but you have to run a whole series of experiments for what it's going to be best at solving within a domain. And then on the other side, and I would say we've got about 20 investments in this category. It's called the integrators, who are like, all right, I keep on top of everything that's happening in terms of scientific papers coming out. I look at all the different frameworks out there, whether I'm dealing with TensorFlow or NLTK or anything out there. And I think that this problem is basically solvable if I can intelligently integrate and adapt these technologies. So an example of something like that is a company we invested in called Textio. Has anyone used Textio ever? All right, people on the panel have. But essentially what they're doing is, if you think about spell check, we would never send out an email without using a technology like that. Think of this as spell check 2.0. For any domain-specific type of text, you can basically optimize it based on knowing everything else that's out there. So the particular example they're dealing with out of the gate is a job description. So we all have to write job descriptions. On average, we suck at writing job descriptions, and it's no fun. So what they've done is, they've read millions of job descriptions. They also understand how long it took to hire a person, how good that person was, what were the demographics of that person after the fact. And they're using fairly rudimentary machine learning technologies to back out, okay, how can we 80-20 this? How can we use data to say, this job description is way too long. You probably shouldn't use these words. If you use this set of words, it's going to be gender biased towards women, and you would probably want to rebalance that. They haven't invented any technique. What they did is they understood a domain very well, and they were like, what can I pick and choose from? And so that, for us, that's the free lunch that's out there. To Richard's point about the fact that most folks working on AI come from academia and therefore very giving to the community. there's so much stuff out there that if you find the right problem, you can just take existing algorithms and use it to solve those problems.
I think you said most of the right things. I think the underlying pattern here is if you're in that second category, you need some interesting data advantage and laser focus, right? And so I'm still curious how they got that data. So you can get all the job posts, but then you actually need to know the companies and then later on like how well that person did. So that was.
I'll just quickly answer. Yeah, one of the reasons we actually invested, so we look at data companies as kind of, have you ever been to a really cheap hamburger place where, you get like this much bun on either side and like this much is the patty? So we're really interested in the problem and the user interface for the problem and the underlying data. And so the reason we invested in large part here is these guys had strong relationships with Microsoft, Amazon. They actually went to Bloomberg to get a whole bunch of this data. And so basically, this was all large amounts of siloed data within organizations, and as soon as you got 6 or 7 of them together, that was enough of a core data set to be like, okay, we can actually do something.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think data is a good place to start. I think a lot of public data sets are available even while we were popularizing some of the tools in the early days with meetups and stuff. Customers would be finding public data sets, there's private data sets, there are data alliances to be formed. I think Google has the 359 degrees view of the world, but that 1%, 1 degree left is amongst the corporations. So corporations will come together and build data alliances, and that's probably going to happen in the next probably 12 months. And a lot of our own customers are building alliances amongst themselves so they can get better models from the same data. There's a lot of new math techniques that have come about called consensus modeling, which you can share the models without create the model as if it was just one continuous data stream as opposed to broken up data monolithics. I think the bigger piece here was, of course, data is one part of it. APIs, the API economy is really on. You can get JSON from a lot of these things, scraping or open source is huge, right? We built an entire community and customer community from just purebred open source and marketing, much like Alexi was one of our big hand to Alexi, who runs an open source consortium in Data by the Bay every year on year. I think a lot of good talent is interesting. I think talent can be grown as well. Obviously, there's actually the other way to look at the company description that Shimon gave was the 2 types of AI companies. The one that are started by the professors or professors in the universities, most likely going to get acquired or fail. The second one is real entrepreneurs who are going to build companies for the long. Think Jeff Bezos, he was building really an AI company in 1997. His shareholder conference still say the same thing. So those are the kind of people who built the horizontals long before we are thinking of them as horizontals. So truly, entrepreneurial stuff is going to come in the next 10 years. It's still just the beginning of AI phase, I would say.
Thank you. So I'll ask one more question of each panelist, and I will ask folks in the audience who have questions for the panelists to please line up in front of this audience mic which we have here if you have questions, so then we can open the floor. So my question will be, each of you obviously has a lot of experience in either the field itself or invest in it, and you have key insights. So what is your key insight? What do you see as your key strength of your company, or in case of Shimon, investing, and where do you want, what do you want to do with it? Where do you want to advance the field? What is your vision of AI from your angle? What do you want to do the next year to maximize this insight?
That's a good question. So I think I was just talking about this the other day with our team. So our first hire was actually a designer. And so as a data company, working in a large organization, we're thinking a lot about problems of actually doing things within an organization. How do knowledge workers become more effective? How do you get things done? And one of the challenges in any organization, I use the example, I think I tweeted something about this the other day, was Dropcam and Nest. And so they're within Google, which is the mothership of all AI companies, yet when Dropcam was acquired a year ago, or a little over a year ago, but I get 10 notifications a day on my phone from Dropcam, which are clouds passing by in front of my house, and it thinks there's a person, coming to my house, right? So it alerts me. And on the other hand, they have AlphaGo, and they're beating like the world champion Go player. So what's going on here, right? Why is my drop cam so stupid, right? It's not that people at Google are stupid, right? You can get these smart people together and they still can't cure cancer, right? What is going on? How can we make people more effective within any kind of organization? I think the biggest challenge for any company, and especially for data companies, is bridging those two worlds, right? So you have the designer who thinks, okay, I'm going to build this awesome thermostat or this awesome camera, and they're very design focused, developing a new product. And then you have the AI people who are kind of maybe decoupled or brought in later. So how can you bring those two groups together in tandem? Because ideas are not born in a second; they develop and they evolve. And so I think that's a unique skill set that we strive for in my organization is to bring those two things together. And it's not easy; it's not pleasant, but you work through it, and I think you come out with a stronger product in the end.
Well, I don't have a company, so this is going to be slightly different from the venture perspective. But I mean, realistically, we're in an interesting time as it relates to the things I focus on because they're just so hyped up to the nth degree right now. What do we have going for us? The fact that we've been, investing in data science and machine intelligence well before any of them were sexy, which is good and bad. So it's good from the perspective of we've seen thousands of these things and we understand sort of subtle and unique patterns for what tends to successfully get a company from seed to A and what doesn't. The downside to that is it makes us on average slightly more jaded, right? Just because we see some of the red flags out of the gate. And so in dealing with a founder, we're going to be very brutally honest about the fact that we've seen this experiment that sounds like a good idea 20 times, and here's why it didn't work, and here are some alternative strategies. And so some people don't necessarily want to hear that, but I'll just share one anecdote. We invested in a company called Domino Data Labs, and I remember I met the founder a year before they were fundraised, just because he was looking for advice, because I'm constantly writing reports and researching the space. And I said, I've looked at so many of these data science tool companies, and I don't believe the B to DS model exists yet. And I was like, I know it well, and I can't wait for hopefully you to prove me wrong, but here are the 4 things that I've been waiting for. And so I kind of laid them out for him. And I don't think he was too happy at the time, but then he came back a year later and he was like, and I was watching the market and I was like, okay, we're starting to move into that. And one of that was just the real pain of team expansion within large organizations, and that being sort of, the thrust of, I don't believe an individual data scientist often will buy a tool, but when you're trying to convert data analysts at an org, it will. So again, kind of annoying out of the gate, but we're just really, really thoughtful about what it takes to scale a data science or machine intelligence org, and hopefully that helps the founder.
I think the reason I'm super excited about AI and the way I'd like to push forward the field is there are 2 things. The first one is artificial intelligence as a field is super exciting because it makes us, it pushes us to ask questions about our own self. Like, what is intelligence? Why are we so special compared to other animals? Is it motor intelligence, linguistic, language intelligence, visual intelligence? And it really asks us and pushes us maybe to, extend definitions of intelligence to, artificial ones and so on. So it has this kind of pretty deep aspect that is very scientific and kind of almost evolutionary. At the same time, it is just incredibly useful. So the reason I'm building both like a research lab as well as like an applied group at Salesforce is that they have a huge amount of data. And I don't know if you saw, but in the last couple of days, Mark sort of talked about artificial intelligence too. And if you have that kind of leadership and excitement, and you have all these resources at hand, you can have so much impact. And they're really working with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands other customers and their data set. So it really becomes the true meta mind if you have an AI group inside an organization like that.
Scale. So math is actually, I remember in Santa Fe we had a researcher who would say math is actually the only provable religion out there, right? And the word data, I mean, the source word for data is datum. Datum is Latin and became popular in the 1700s. It's actually a source word Sanskrit. Datum means to give, to impart energy, to impart a mineral with high, rich in energy. So I think the data as a whole, data science is a search for truth, right? So amplifying that, whether through automation, through AI, through more deeper algorithms that are more accurate, I think is going to amplify our speed at which we discover ourselves, right? Which is kind of the deeper part here. As a company, we are building people, right? People are the product of a company and a startup. And we continue to dream more beautiful dreams, right? How do you come up with more beautiful data products? So designers are our product managers. Really, we don't have product managers, so we actually get designers as the interface between customers and the products we're building. One step further, past beauty sells itself, and defending your community or nurturing your community love with beautiful data products. That's kind of one of the core thought process there. I think about 6 or 9 weeks ago, I would say, I woke up with a much more richer dream. And that dream is actually much more simpler, but actually much more deeper. And that, I would say, my vision is to build 10 women CEOs in Silicon Valley and unleash them, kind of much like PayPal Mafia. We're about 47% women in our company. We're size 60, still small. But our vision, yes, our vision is to actually build real leaders like our VP of Marketing, VP of Sales, or a lot of really hardcore leaders who think holistically, because the way to bring change is simple things. My working mom raised me, and so I was always envisioning it with 50% women, right? And Silicon Valley, which is kind of the high point of civilization today as we think of it, is really extremely gender biased and extremely, most people don't take the bus, right? So we think of futuristic ways, and hopefully hybrid cars will get us there. But really, there's a ton of innovation that can be done in social life, right? So I think, and that can be done through work, because work occupies, work refines us. And so how you build a culture that is very flat inside your organization, where data science is the art of asking lots of questions. So you'll be asked lots of questions in your company building because you are hiring a lot of data scientists. And they will be cynical most of the time, and most of the times they'll be right, 99% accuracy rate. So you're going to be knowledge. If you thought of knowledge as power, and a knowledge economy is what you're building, you're very likely to be the least powerful person in the company if you started it. And you're going to be surrounding yourself with much, much more smarter people who've thought seven steps beyond the Go game, right? So I think that's kind of the people you're surrounding yourself with. And it's probably been true for all companies, but specifically if you're thinking the data companies, everybody is going to be asking for data and signals. And there are lots of ambiguous signals that you see as a startup. So you still have to have the faith, right? Kind of the belief. And I think the combination of belief, which is what Richard was talking about, as well as the pragmatism of building a business, I think it's really, truly one of the best times to build, because in many ways, infrastructure is easy to get, like open source, cloud. Getting communities is also reasonably possible if you're honest, and build trust with your customers. So a lot of the other pieces have been truly commodified in some sense. The only thing that's really you're trying to build is build a very an economy of truly more giving than taking data as in to give, right? So.
Thank you all for these beautiful insights. Let's open the floor to the audience. Please introduce yourself and then ask a question.
I'll be first. So I want to touch base on 2 points actually you've been expressing just a second ago. One is about the economy, second one about the evolution. And no matter what part of the spectrum in the social and political life you stand on, you cannot deny that market is always trying to improve, right? So we had blacksmith, which were replaced by the hydraulic presses. We had, professional horse riders that were replaced by the cars and the drivers. And now we see that the drivers are being replaced by the driverless cars. So nobody rides the horse for money. Nobody does the blacksmithing for money, right? So we're always trying to improve, right? So clearly, artificial intelligence is an improvement upon the natural one, right? So we're getting short of the natural intelligence, so we're trying to create something better. So here's my question to the esteemed panelists. Don't you find yourself waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, thinking of what you doing in the daily life will contribute essentially to the demise of the human natural intelligence? So the people would use their intelligence as a vocation, not as a profession. Thank you.
Please introduce yourself.
My name is Konstantin Budnik. I'm CEO of the company Memcore, so I am guilty as you probably as well.
Thank you.
Guilty. No, I think, so one of the big transformations, why is AI sexy, right? Why is it really cool? And actually one of the goals for the company is to make AI boring. And if AI is still boring, it's still sexy after H2O, then we failed, right? So our goal is to make AI so boring that you don't call anyone to say, we saw a driver, we saw something that's cool based on AI. Much like search today is boring. I think the key piece of that is that historically, software engineers were historically it's last 20 years, 40 years, were busy looking at others as they were automating their lives out of existence, right? So AI has the capability to consume all software. So software was eating the world, AI is going to eat software. In some sense, all of software, rule-based software, or most all of rule-based software is going to become AI-based software, pattern recognition-based software. So that's opportunity one, kind of like the Y2K opportunity one. You kind of can translate all rule-based code to AI-based code. And that's why Microsoft's excited it, Google is excited about it, or all software, Oracle is excited about it. All software houses are going to be excited about change in big software, right? But the cold sweat movement is that we are going to find that software engineers can themselves be automated out of their existence, which is kind of an interesting part. DevOps.ai, for example, is one of the new pieces coming up here and there. But I would say a lot of software automation for software and automatic coding of software is likely to happen. It's a before internet, after internet movement is the before AI and after AI movement. And I think a lot of lives will be changed, and that's actually true. And I think a lot of, and the good way to keep human intelligence in the loop is to build visual interpretation, which is human interpretation of intelligence. If you can understand what's going on from the black box model to somewhat more of a gray box model, then you keep the kind of the human in the loop for the bigger automation that's happening for AI. But 100 years from now, is AI going to be around or a human going to be around? I think that's a question to be asked. AI is going to be around.
Yeah. So this is what the panel topic was listed as, so I thought about this a bit before. So the first thing I'd say on the general topic is I don't wake up in a cold sweat because this is a long way off. I think I go with Andrew Ng on this one about, someone asked him a similar question and he said, I don't worry about this in the same way I don't worry about income redistribution on Mars or something, because we're not there yet. We don't have a colony up there. So I think it is a long way off, and if you're a practitioner in the field, and most of the people I think in here are, you know what you're doing day to day and how difficult it is. Where you spend a lot of energy and a lot of research and a lot of time getting something to do, getting an algorithm to work in a very narrow problem, in a very narrow implementation, kind of on guardrails with training wheels, right? And so to take that and say it's going to become self-aware, so the singularity, all that kind of stuff, I said the S word, sorry, but it's,
Taking a shot after.
I think that's way, way, way off. In terms of the near-term impact on jobs, I think that's more real. You see it with regular software companies and Uber and things like that already. It's causing ripples. What I would say is it's automating, as he mentioned, things that already were automated and making them more efficient. I think certain jobs and certain roles in the short term, if you can be automated, you should be thinking about the next thing already, right? The good news is, as humans, new humans are born, there's new generations. We saw this at LinkedIn, actually. What's happened over the last 20 to 30 years is the frequency with which people learn new skills and new careers and new jobs is increasing rapidly. You used to have a job for 20 or 30 years. More and more people are reinventing themselves constantly. And you have Coursera, Udacity, things like that. So I think that the reality is there's always new work, there's always new jobs. We have to be more creative about it. I'm not an economist. I don't know the short-term reality in terms of like universal income or, how do we buffer and how do we bridge these gaps, I think is the key question. But in the long run, in the same way, like you said, hydraulic presses, we're going to come up with new things and they're going to be difficult, and the machines we build until we get to that singularity are not going to figure it out for us, right? So we're going to need people to figure that out.
So I'll just be very blunt about the way I think about this and why I do what I do, because I've thought about this a lot. My fundamental premise in general is you can't play defense against technology. Like, I just take that as a given. And so given that, what do we do? What are our obligations? And for me, it boils down to three things. And the first is, every technology is going to have a net positive and negative effect. I think the best we can do is try to over-index on the good side of things. And how do we do that? So I will be blunt about the fact that I will only invest in things that I think will have a net positive effect on society. And so, investment is a piece of that. There are a whole bunch of nonprofits doing absolutely incredible things with data and machine intelligence, from dealing with climate issues to Digital Defenders of Children, which is an organization called Thorn. And so we're seeing a lot of good happening there. The second piece of this is making sure a new technology type is effectively democratized, right? And there are a lot of folks that are working on this problem. I volunteer at OpenAI, which is hoping to do that. We're also lucky, to Richard's point, about the fact that a lot of folks are academics and so are pushing this out into the world just to make sure more of the community, the power is distributed and more of the community is involved in shaping what it becomes. And that sort of bleeds into the third piece is I think we're obligated to get in front of regulations and systems that will help deal with this technology. And I think one of the risks we face is, to your point, we're learning skills much more quickly, but I think the pace of change is accelerating. And so, 50 years ago when you had a 20-year tenure at a corporation, if you needed to be retrained, often the corporate would step up and take that role to make sure you were going to be okay for that next skill set. That's kind of dried up. And so, my colleague at Bloomberg Beta, Roy Bahat, is heading up something called the Future of Work Commission. And the idea there is we don't know some of these answers. One of them fundamentally is this shift any different than anything that's happened before? So working with economists, to your point, to answer those fundamental questions, getting everyone to the table from public and private industry to just say, okay, who's going to own this? There's going to be worker displacement, whether it's white collar with a lot of these analyst tools, or whether it's blue collar with self-driving cars. How do we make sure we get in front of this and keep the American population and the world population working, because bad things happen when people are out of work. We're good? Okay.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more audience question, if folks have a question.
Hi, my name is Santosh, and my question to the panel is, today AI is maturing from its infancy. We are able to talk to it. AI is able to talk back to us. We are playing with it like a small child, but and it is growing very fast, right? The aging is not like human aging, that it will grow one day at a time. It has exponential growth. Are we playing with a monster?
Or a sadhu, right? So we actually think that AI will be like a sadhu or a guru in our company. It's not a bot. I think bots, the new age word of it's the same as racist, right? So to think of AI as not being sentient is like think of data in Star Trek, right? Sort of, they are probably more likely to be reliable and less human error than human error, right? So I would say it's actually the opposite. We are building. That's one of the, so we good kudos on the open source. We chose to be open source because it could be substantially a monster. 4 years ago, we had the vision that this could be so dramatic that it needs to be open, right? And so open source kind of makes it democratizes it. Okay. But in the deployment of it, you will see some real substantial monsters being deployed on the world. And luckily, hopefully there are enough engineers, enough ability to debug these tools, right? Sort of, it's truly you need to be able to debug a complex system on why this model failed to send this patient to ICU, right? I mean, literally, that's the kind of AI that's being deployed today. And it could save lives by being applied correctly, by early diagnosis of disease. We've seen people use it to fight cancer ultrasound image recognition, for example, like 10 years ahead of human eye. So before we get to this dangerous state, I would say to some degree, a lot of good will come together as well, and hopefully, just like humans, you would have good intelligence and evil intelligence, and hopefully it'll balance
Right.
them.
So for that point, I would like to add that, yes, when you say about a saint and a monster, yes, that decision is still with the humans. But we are crossing that limit so fast that at some point it will just go beyond the human hands altogether.
It is already beyond human, I think, actually. To some degree, it is good that it is beyond human, because the humans are actually more likely to mess with it, right? To some degree, I think the bots, so I had a question for my own conference last month. How would bots meet together and do a data by the bay themselves? And that was a line on my right, data by the bots, right, or bots by the bay. And the answer was maybe they already have met 10 years ago and we don't know, right? So why do we think they will announce it to us? The singularity was not televised, right?
I'll just echo my previous answer. So I think that the bots by the bay is a way off. But yeah, at some point it's conceivable, probably in the near future, that purpose-driven built machines, we're going to have to address some real moral dilemmas. And I think we're already pretty much there on that point when you think about self-driving cars. So there's been a bunch of writing and thinking about this. And as a software engineer, there was always a classic dilemma when you went to school. You learned about good practices, ethics, and principles in engineering. You're building a bridge. You have an ethical responsibility. That bridge doesn't fall down when people drive over it. Now, when you're building a car, it's the classic Isaac Asimov laws of robotics dilemma. Is it protecting the person in the car, or is it protecting the other cars? Is it going to do some math to try to minimize total casualties? These are things that we haven't figured out, and they're happening. And the technology, as often happens, is leading us figuring these things out. And similarly, people, I'll throw this out there, where it's a panel, we're supposed to be a little controversial, but people are very worried about terrorism, right? And they think about, okay, is an AI going to come kill us? Is a drone going to kill us? Just think about cars. You have self-driving cars, self-driving trucks. Those, when I learned how to drive, the instructions were, this is a massive weapon, and I had some former drill sergeant doing driver's ed and saying, you're getting behind the wheel of a massive weapon. And so now we have a software system that's coordinating centralized across all of these self-driving cars. That's a massive weapon. So there are things like this that as society we're going to have to think about, and I think that's more realistic than saying we're creating a monster. The monster is us, and we're the programmers programming these things.
You just jumped on the point that I was going to make because you're 10x smarter than me. But I was just going to try to be quasi-controversial and point out that often it's the fact that we are the monsters. You can envision a not so distant future where self-driving cars have dropped the amount of deaths on the road by 1,000x. And sure, it's going to be horrible the first time a self-driving car hits a kid. And we're going to be 10,000 times more mad at it than when a drunk driver hits a kid, and so that might set things back. But you can actually, it's not that inconceivable to imagine a future where it's actually irresponsible for you to get behind the wheel, because you're 1,000x more of a liability on the road than a self-driving car is. And if you hit a kid, it will make sense where it's just like, wow, that really selfish person, they felt like driving, and therefore my child, was hit by a car. And the same thing is true, one of the things that kind of baffles me is if you take a look at hospital situations, the rates of drug misadministration are extremely high, and a lot of deaths in hospitals come as a result of that. And we could have computer systems that could help solve these issues. We choose not to, and why do we choose not to? Because we would prefer to have a human to blame at the end of the day when a catastrophic event happens, even if it doesn't lead to an optimal outcome. And so, in that case, we choose for ourselves to be a monster when there could be a better outcome, and it's going to take a lot of time for society to change its views on that. Not that there aren't massive issues with some of the systems we're building, in areas like reinforcement learning. If you're rewarding an outcome, you're not talking about the means to getting there. And that gets back to Bostrom's famous paperclip problem of, you ask the machine to build paper clips. It uses all available resources, which is every metal component in the world, and synthesizes other things and destroys the world, right? So I'm not making, and you pointed to the why problem of, can your system actually explain why it did what it did? So there are huge problems we're going to have to deal with. But I think we do have to understand that there's a lot of harm that comes today that can be avoided. So we should just be a little thoughtful about that as well. All good.
And some doctors actually are so thoughtful. They want to use the AI as their first diagnostic agent, right? Sort of to become, and some of the pragmatic doctors we've spoken to, it'll become criminal not to ask a computer what are the top 3 choices to choose. Because maybe they're clouded by their emotional state of the day. And I think that's actually one of the key pieces, right? So humans are going to be good at what they're good at, which is build emotional energy, build a lot of community and trust. And the more we are able to build trust with both the AI and the human intelligence that surrounds us, I think the more open we are to ideas that are not ours. And I think Moneyball is a difficult act. Right? It takes courage to follow the suggestions that the data says. When the Oakland A's were doing that, Oakland had given up on them, right? Sort of, and to that degree, they let them do a Moneyball on their favorite team. So day-to-day decision making is really hard, and it takes a lot of courage. And so when data or the AI says you need to do this, it still needs courage for the human to act on it. And I think that's kind of an interesting human AI conversations waiting to happen very soon. And I think global markets are probably not yet capable of dealing with this mass transformation of knowledge. And information has always been what we've been trading as in an economy. And I think to some degree, AI could be playing that economy's key role. And the key player in the market could be AI itself, right?
Thank you. Let me summarize. Actually, I think it's really fascinating that the main theme which emerged from this panel, as I hear it, is actually that human intelligence is what is actually emerging, supported by AI. And Shri talked about building humans, and I kind of want to just give you all guys a little challenge. So we found that at the Data by the Way conference, the main value which we built is human connections. And so actually even foster connections among the panelists. So a piece of history, last year, as a result of our previous panel, one of the panelists joined Shri's company. So I'm not encouraging you to do that, but I think each of you actually, as I hear it, actually interested in human development, right? So Shri thinks of building new leaders. Pete thinks of plans to improve productivity at workplace. Siobhan obviously invests in things she believes in, and they're basically human first. And Richard, I think, empowers a whole bunch of people through the tools, because Salesforce eventually basically governs large workforces.
And Alexei brings us all together. So big hand to Alexei.
Thank you. Thank you. So I just wonder if you guys can continue this conversation among yourselves and see kind of what betterment of human condition in Silicon Valley at least we can enact. And also another thing I want to ask all of you guys, as you notice, we have a very strong overfitting signal. If you submit a paper to this conference, as you submit a talk, you're highly likely to be acquired by your Salesforce. So I really encourage all of you.
That's my cue to get out of here.
Yes, to do that. And the third point I want to make is that we have, I think, believe the best happy hour in any data conference. We have, 6 to 8 happy hour with full bar, excellent food, and conversation. So encourage everybody to continue this upstairs and thank our panelists for the excellent panel.